Good morning, you 30 in front of me. Good to see you. Well, by the way, if you filled out a paper copy of the evaluation, we will ask you to give us that on your way out. Hopefully the rest of you found your way to the website. It took me a second because I kept loading that URL address into the search line rather than the URL line, so somebody had to point that out to me. That's why I wasn't getting there, so appreciate your help. You know, dwelling chapels on Fridays, again, the purpose of these, and it's at the front of that assessment, it explains it. The purpose of these this year has been, there's sometimes so little time to process the Monday and Wednesday speakers. They're great, they're full of wisdom, but 10 minutes later you're in sociology or biology or chemistry, and there really sometimes isn't the time for us to respond to what God's doing. So we don't really want to train you to hear the word and walk away, but we want to all, of course, respond to it. And so Friday dwelling chapels are a time where we revisit Monday's talk. And taking Colossians 3:16 as our imperative, we want to dwell richly in the word. And so Fridays are kind of devoted to this time. Not only that, but often speakers come and tell us the what, but then we're left with understanding how. How do I live this out? And so Friday chapels also take the what that the speaker gave us and ask the Lord, how do you now want us to live this out? And so that's another feature of Dwelling Chapel. So for those of you who've been coming, we really like your input to find that if those goals are in fact something you're experiencing, or if we could do that better. So anyway, on Monday, Alistair Begg challenged us to realize that our time is in God's hands. And I hope this has been a good semester for you. I hope this has been a semester that's felt manageable, that you've been able to focus on your work, focus on your relationships, focus on your relationship with God. But I know that life doesn't always go that smoothly, that there are interruptions, there are surprises, and especially there are difficulties. And so some of you have experienced that this semester. For some of you, there have been financial difficulties or issues at home, or relational struggles, or emotional struggles, or stuff if you work, stuff at work, with your health maybe. And so what Alistair Begg encouraged us during these times of difficulty, on Monday he encouraged us that our lives are in God's hands, and in particular that God is actually doing a work in us in those difficult times. And I can't say it better than he did, so let's just watch a little bit of what he spoke to us about on Monday.
You are sovereign over my gray matter capacity. You are in charge of the bounds of my habitation. You are sovereign, just as we've been singing this morning. No matter how bad the sadness is, no matter how deep the overwhelming flood is, I have to come back to the fact that my times are in your hands. I'm being schooled in the school of your providence. Berkhoff, the systematic theologian, defines providence as the continued exercise of the divine energy whereby the Creator preserves all his creatures, is operative in all that comes to pass in the world, and directs all things to their appointed end. Packer says, God is completely in charge of his world. His hand may be hidden, but his rule is absolute. And what is he doing? Well, he's working everything out in conformity with the purpose of his will. What is the purpose of his will? To put together a people that are his very own, from every tribe, language, nation, tongue, so on, and to unite them in their avowed commitment to the lordship and kingship of Jesus, no matter where they are in the entire universe. And one day that company will be assembled, and on that day they will declare, salvation belongs to the Lord who sits upon the throne, to the Lamb who sits upon the throne. And in the process of moving his children to that ultimate end, he has one single purpose in view. And let me tell you what it is. This is what God is seeking to do in your life, in a phrase. He is seeking, working to make you like his son, Jesus. That's what he's doing. That's the significance of Romans 8:28. And we know that in all these things, God is working them together for the good of those who love him, who've been called according to his purpose. Yeah, but what about the fact that my mother just died and she's only in her 40s? What about the fact that my sister had a stillborn child? What about the fact that my spouse just got MS? What about the overwhelming magnitude of a world that seems to be spinning out of control? What are you doing, God? I'm going to make you like Jesus.
So that is what God is doing. And the reference to Romans 8:28 is a solid one, that God is, in difficult times especially, is conforming us to the image of his Son. We know that God causes all things to work together for good, and that particular good is to form us according to his purposes. So that's a good word. That's the what. What is God doing in this time? But what we want to know is, how do we cooperate with that work? How do I increase the probability that during times of trials, that this can actually happen in my soul, that I can let God conform me into the image of his Son? Because Philippians 2:12 and 13 says we do have a part. It says, work out your salvation, by which Paul means your sanctification. Work out your salvation in fear and trembling. And what fear and trembling means is weakness. That's what Paul means by fear and trembling. Work out your journey in fear and trembling and weakness. And of course, that's what trials do. They make us feel weak. They make us feel like we can't control our lives. They make us feel that we can't attain certain ends, perhaps, that we desire. But Paul says, work out this journey in fear and trembling and weakness, because God is at work in you. He's already begun to work. He has allowed this into your life to do a deep work. And so work this out with him. So the question would be, how do we do this? Well, let's take a look at how trials work. So I'm going to ask them to throw up a few diagrams up here. Right, so you and I, we wake up in the morning, most mornings, and something gets us out of bed, besides our alarm clock. Some good. We look forward to the day. We look forward to what's happening in the day. We look forward to what may happen in the semester. My good may be the natural good of, getting my degree, of passing my class. The natural good of going out to see my friends. The natural good even of breakfast, or being able that night to go out, be entertained, be with people. The good in the long run of maybe if I'm called to this, to find someone to spend my life with. The good of actually achieving something of significance. So what gets us up in the morning each day is some kind of natural hope or good that we see in the future. Well, that's good. And a lot of these goods are good goods. They are things like finding a vocation, getting a job, falling in love, being loved, making the team, enjoying health, having a measure of control in our life, and experiencing success. So a lot of these things are good goods that get us up in the morning and to which we move toward. So we love and desire these goods, and to a degree we attach to them. But here's what happens. If we think we're going to attain it, of course, we have this vision of joy. So if I'm going to make the team, if I'm going to get the job, if I'm going to find the person, I imagine joy. But part of me is a little bit anxious because I'm not fully in control sometimes of whether I'm going to get these goods. And so a little part of me, as I look toward these goods, I have a little grief. Or I worry about a little grief. What if I don't get it? And I have a little bit of premonition of grief. So I want joy, but I worry about grief. And of course, what a trial does is something that comes in between our hoped for good and us. It is something suddenly that makes this good perhaps unattainable. If I want to enjoy health, it may be some illness. And suddenly I'm not sure when I'm going to feel better. If I'm applying for an internship or a summer job, and that's my good, and that's kind of providing the energy, suddenly I get a little rejection letter. Wow. A little wall has become between myself and the good I desire. And now instead of imagining joy, I'm kind of worrying about grief, like, am I not going to get this? And so a trial is this kind of wall that hopefully only temporarily comes between myself and the good I'm achieving. And as a result of that, I experience a couple things. I experience anxiety and fear. I wonder, am I going to get this good? Am I going to experience joy, or am I going to experience grief? See, life becomes uncertain with trials. And so a trial comes in, interrupts our journey toward the good, suddenly casts things in uncertainty, and we correspondingly emotionally feel anxiety and fear. Am I going to get the good? Am I going to feel joy? Or am I going to have to grieve? And indeed, the measure to which we are attached to these goods will probably be measured by the anxiety scale. To the degree that I'm really attached to this good, to the degree that this is really my program for happiness in life, this job or this achievement or this thing, to the degree that I am attached to that, you will know how attached you are to that good as your program for happiness by the degree of your anxiety when a trial comes. If you are strongly, strongly attached to it, even if it's a good, if you're overly attached to it, your anxiety will be very high when the trial comes in. And so this is, I hope you recognize this as kind of a weekly experience with us. As we move towards our good, trials come, and we experience a certain measure of anxiety, and that anxiety will, that's good information. That anxiety is going to tell us how much I am trusting in that good as my program for happiness in life. So my anxiety in this way is a kind of friend. It's a kind of teacher. It is showing me myself, wow, I am really attached to getting this particular job or being loved by this particular person. So the problem is not that these goods are not good. The problem comes when we find we are over-attached to these goods, that in fact we're more attached to them than we are to God. And of course, the scriptures will back this up. See, what a trial will do is it will show us where our treasure is. It'll show us where our heart is. The measure of our anxiety will be a great tutor for us. It'll show us where our true treasures are. And that's good information. That's good information. In Deuteronomy 8:2, Moses is reflecting with the people of Israel about this 40 years of trial in the desert. And he said, the purpose of that was to humble you and test you in order to know what was in your heart. Now, this wasn't God just punishing them for this, but it was testing them in the sense that one tests metals. They heat them up to let the impurities come to the top so you can see, oh, look at those impurities. Those need to be skimmed off. So the outcome or tell-us of a trial is to show us, wow, look at that. I am really attached to these things. I might be overly attached. And our response to God is, thank you for showing me this. See, God kind of has his arm around us during trials. And he's saying, I think you're ready to see a couple things. And so I'm going to let this trial come. I think you're ready to see how attached you are to these things. And I think you're ready to see that. I'm going to show you what is in your heart. And trials show us our need for God. This is what Paul realized in 2 Corinthians, right? We don't know what this thorn in the flesh was, and a lot of ink has been spilled on it. But the thorn in the flesh was apparently some obstacle, some trial that prevented Paul from experiencing the good. Now, we don't know if it was an illness. We know that he may have struggled in later life with blindness. It could have been depression. It could have been some outside circumstance or person that was making life difficult for Paul. But whatever it was, he describes it as a thorn. And really what we can say is that made him feel weak. The good life that he imagined for himself, he was not able completely to achieve on his own terms. And so he said, you know what, I prayed it would go away. And that's nice, because it kind of gives us permission to pray that our trials would go away. That is perfectly allowed. Lord, please take this away. And we want to pray for each other in that. Because sometimes if people experience too much trial, they do become vulnerable to sin, to self-medicating, to escaping, things like this. So we do want to pray for ourselves and others in trials. And Paul did that. He said, I prayed sincerely 3 times. Let this trial be gone from me. But turns out God has an independent will. And so he said, you know what? Here's what God said to me when I prayed. Finally, he said, my power is made perfect in weakness. My grace is sufficient for you. See, that's the problem. When trials comes, we don't feel sufficient. We don't feel enough. We don't feel now we can attain the goods that were our programs for happiness. We do not feel enough. You know how that Greek word translates sufficient? It translates as enough. God said to him, you know what? Here's going to be a time where you get to experiment if my grace is enough for you. If my love is enough for you. Because it's especially during times of weakness and difficulty that you get to experiment with receiving my love deeply as the program for happiness. The preeminent program for your happiness is relational. You will finally only experience joy and happiness in life if you are able to rely on the one thing that can never be taken from you. Remember when Jesus said to Mary and Martha, don't distract Mary at my feet because she is experiencing the one thing that can never be taken from her, and that's me. Wow. See, trials are this invitation to experience the one thing that can never be taken from you and to see if that is enough. And so Paul comes to a place where he says, I actually delight in weakness, in insults and hardships. I got to tell you, I'm not there. I do not delight in weakness and hardships and insults. But he says, for when I am weak, then I am strong. What does he mean by strong? Well, what he means is he has the capacity to feel God's love. His strength is not just a force, like a brute force, like the ability to lift something. That's not what he's talking about when he talks about the power being made perfect in weakness. He's talking about the power to experience love, which is more like a capacity. It's more like lungs being able to breathe in a lot of air. And so that's why he says in Ephesians 3, his prayer for the Ephesians is that you would have the power, not brute force, not fortitude, not gutting it out, not being tough, but you'd have the power to experience how wide and long and high and deep is the love of Christ. That is the power of capacity, and it is forged primarily in times of difficulty, when we get to experiment with, will God's love be sufficient for me? That is such a gift. Trials are a gift. They are hard, but it is God's gentle invitation in. So what do we do in trials? Well, here's what you do. In times of weakness, you're working out your sanctification, you're letting yourself be filled with the Spirit. Remind yourself that God is always already there. Sometimes God may seem distant. You may be praying and He's not answering your prayers, and you're thinking God is not there. That is not true. It is a fact that He is there. It's a metaphysical, theological fact. God is always already here. And secondly, you need to remind yourself He is doing a loving work. He may be more at work in times of trial, even if He feels absence because of that, than He is maybe even at other times in your life. And feel free to speak the truth to Him in prayer. Say, Lord, this is really hard. Feel free to complain to Him. Fully 1/3 of the Psalms are lament Psalms. And you know what that'll breed in your life? That'll breed intimacy. To be able to speak the experience of your truth to God in prayer and say, God, this is hard, that will breed intimacy. And finally say, God, what are you showing me? What attachments are you showing me? Because you are purging some things with your arms around me. It's a gentle work that feels difficult, but it's a work of love. What are you showing me that I may need to detach to? And finally, let Him speak to you love amid truth. Let Him speak to you, my grace is sufficient for you. And that will be somewhere between a gentle conversation and a wrestling match. But see if you can take it in, that in fact, this is a work of love during these times. And so right now, we want to talk a little bit more about, in a moment, how can I practice this attachment to God, even not in the difficult times, even in the better times, so that when these times come, I can attach to Him.
Biola University offers a variety of biblically centered degree programs, ranging from business to ministry to the arts and sciences. Visit biola.edu to find out how Biola could make a difference in your life.